Thank you for that introduction, and I'm excited to share some things that we've been working on in the Family History Technology Laboratory. Um, and I think that uh, the topic I really wanted to talk about today is about therapeutic family history. So this may seem like a strange topic, but hopefully you'll understand why it's important, and we'll be able to kind of understand how the spirit of Elijah and family history can actually help us as we deal with emotional and mental health challenges. So I think it's interesting that um, there is currently President Reese at BYU said that he calls it an epidemic of loneliness. And it turns out that loneliness increases your risk of premature death by about the same amount as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And we all know those cigarettes are not good, and yet a lot of us are lonely. Um, Poor or insufficient social connection is associated with increased risk of heart disease and stroke. Loneliness is also associated with anxiety, depression, and dementia, and as well as it increases your susceptibility to viruses and respiratory illnesses like COVID. This is kind of an interesting study of teens in the United States and the United Kingdom and England, and I think they were particularly trying to point out some of the challenges with smartphones. But I think it's also, you could just take a look at these trends. Whatever they're caused by, they don't look good. So basically, if you take a look at the y-axis here, this is the percentage of girls and boys that answer this question. They have, in the first one, the combined depressive symptoms. And you can see that since 2010, these have been increasing rapidly. A lot of them disagree with, I'm a likable person. I have good qualities. A lot of them feel like they're a failure. I think particularly if you take a look at this, these numbers for teens in the United States, my life is not very useful. I enjoy life as much as anyone, so a lot of people think they're not enjoying life. And I just think that these are, all of these come together to say that we are in the midst of significant mental health challenges. I'm actually a school board member for Alpine School Board here in Utah Valley, and we see it much more of students having problems with their mental health, feeling like they can't get to school and therefore they can't learn. If you take a look at some other elements here, do you have negative feelings about life? Again, we're seeing almost 30%. I worry a lot, or I'm often unhappy. Again, these are trends, particularly in young women, that they seem to feel like they can't do anything right, or life often seems meaningless. Anyway, the point I was trying to make here is that we are living in a time when there are significant mental health and anxiety challenges. And so I was really impressed with a couple of Elder Gong's talks recently in conference. And see, it appears to me that perhaps one of the keys to solving some of these mental health and anxiety challenges is to look at family history. I'm just going to read these because I think they're significant. Connecting with our ancestors can change our lives in surprising ways. From their trials and accomplishments, we gain faith and strength. From their love and sacrifice, we learn to forgive and move forward. Our children become resilient. That's one of the big things that these studies have shown, is that youth today are living much closer to the edge where a very small negative experience can all of a sudden send them to where they're feeling hopeless. We gain protection and power. Ties with ancestors increases family closeness, gratitude, miracles. Such ties can bring help from the other side of the veil. And I think, when you talk about Elijah turning the hearts of the fathers to the children and the children to their fathers, part of that is those children need help and they need their ancestors to intervene in their lives to help them to be more resilient and stronger. So anyway, this actually, he gave a couple of other talks. And in the Family History Technology Lab, we often give students a chance to think about which projects they'd like to work on. And so I think a lot of our students felt like they would like to play a part in creating solutions to these mental health challenges and look for ways to help populations that are having a difficult time. So, what we're currently working on is then an application that will find and display therapeutic family history stories. This is actually a challenge. There's several pieces of it. One is figuring out, is this hypothesis true that family history is therapeutic? Again, this is not something that is investigated in general in the social sciences, but I've been working with a professor in psychology who actually does look at things like how do reading the scriptures impact your mental health, and he actually has people inside of an MRI machine that will be reading scriptures. And so we would like to do a similar experiment with family history and determine the effect of doing family history on your mental health. So to start this off with, I wanted to give a little bit of a history about family history stories. And about 1997, at the sesquicentennial celebration for the pioneers entering the Valley, there was a request that can't we somehow create an experience? This is way before Family Search or anything like that. And can we create experiences for people who are going to come to these sesquicentennial celebrations that have to do with a story about their ancestor? So we had a bunch of energetic students that wanted to work on this. We had professors at BYU that felt this was a call that they'd like to answer. We had this database engine that had the beginnings of Family Search's tree on it. We had image databases, so we could grab images for some of these pioneers that we had pictures of. We had Crossing the Ocean Index and Crossing the Plains Index, so we could find people in there. And the ancestral file, which again was different than Family Search, but had a lot of this information that went into Family Search. And so people could walk up to a booth during the sesquicentennial celebration, and we would look up and see if they had ancestors. We could find them for about a third of the people, but about 2/3 of them we could not find a ancestor. And so the question was, well, what can we do about this? How can we increase the hit rate, if you will? And so we know that we had names and dates and places and events and relationships. We didn't really have a story about these ancestors, but we could make up a story given all this information. And so we went ahead, for example, looking up Gordon Hinckley's pioneer ancestry. We could find one of his ancestors and a spouse and a line from that ancestor down to Gordon B. Hinckley and a bunch of birth dates that we could weave in there, where they were born, some events from their life. And then we could weave all of those together and start putting in connecting words to potentially write a story. So now we got John Oscethorpe. Your great grandfather was born in Sheffield, Yorkshire, England. Again, all of a sudden it becomes a story, which is more attractive than just saying a list of dates and names. And I think this is kind of the direction we're pursuing is how do we create, I mean, this does not really seem like a terribly therapeutic family history story. However, it kind of shows the power of creating a story from facts. And if you could find a picture about them too, all of a sudden you start to feeling like I'm connected to this person. It's actually interesting. One of the other things the Family History Technology Lab has been working on for several years is was prompted by a therapist in Ohio, not a member of the church, who contacted me, and she says, I need the Family History Technology laboratory to create a new app for my blind patrons. And so from her perspective, she dealt with homeless people. And the first thing she did was she found out one of their ancestors that was dead so she could hook them into Family Search. And she says, as I would work with my homeless people as a therapist, I found that the best therapy that would help them get into a better emotional and mental state was to start looking at Family Search. And when they realized they were connected to all these other people, they started to believe that they were worth something. And so she said, the problem is a lot of my the people that I'm a therapist for are blind. And so can you create a Family Search experience for blind people? And so we created this Alexa app that would let blind people actually, or people with macular degeneration, actually explore their family tree. And so that kind of got us into this therapy and provided more evidence that family history really is therapeutic, because this therapist was able to use it with her clients to actually help their mental state. So anyway, you're kind of seeing the start here then of how a story can be a little more engaging than just a bunch of facts. We were also able then to throw in some things out of the pioneer journals that would hook into the sesquicentennial. So one other thing that's interesting is if you go into Family Search, as you go into the person page and then look at the about piece. So here I am with one of my ancestors. And so first go into that person. And then when you go to the About tab here, you'll notice that they've actually done this inside of Family Search. And so they've hooked together all of these facts to create a story. This, again, notice it says down here, this life history was computer generated. It's based on the information in the Details tab. And so here was all these details that are pretty darn boring. But if we throw a little text about it around it, you can start to see how I could actually be connected to that person. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit of the history of this. A lot of work since. Dave Embley have worked on extracting information and throwing it into an ontology that could create a person's story. Uh, some other work that's been going on in the Family History Technology Laboratory is handwriting recognition. And uh, if you remember 10 years ago or so, there was an indexing emphasis in family search, and a ton of it was just trying to decipher what this handwriting said. And so the question was, is there a way of having the computer actually interpret this handwriting? And so here you can see we actually participated in a competition for German handwriting recognition. Even though this seems fairly faint, we got zero errors on this transcription. Here's a French handwriting piece with just one error out of this this whole page. And I think that now I'm going to grasp at straws here, but I think that Elder Gong in his last conference talk mentioned that they're putting in 1 million new records per day into family search, and a lot of this is done by automatically reading handwriting and then putting those names into family search. This is actually also probably a lot of you are familiar with these large language models like ChatGPT and deep learning. I personally feel like Heavenly Father's helped these technologies to progress so that we can actually get these handwritten documents and put them into family search. And so I think that now I can grab a paragraph style. Again, a lot of the documents we're going to go through are written like this. Maybe it's a priest, and this paragraph is going to be about one of his patrons that was baptized, and you're going to have to weed out the stuff like, yes, he brought his dog to the baptism, and you're going to have to figure out which is his parents in this paragraph style. And that was a lot harder before we had these large language models. They're really helping us to be successful to where now we can grab almost any handwritten document and determine what it says and potentially create a family history entry in family search for that person. So now we have full text indexing for census records, birth records, all of these things, professions, and so you can imagine we're getting to the point where we can really start creating great stories that may use information from all of these documents in order to create a great story about a person. Maybe if you've done indexing before, you remember seeing something like this, and potentially you were trying to get the name out of here and maybe the birth date if it was there. However, there's a ton of other information in these censuses like occupation, education. If you know that the census taker was walking from house to house, you know something about who are the neighbors to this person, and potentially they could be part of this story. So I think that there's a lot of these pieces that we can put into enriched stories. Death records are another piece that we would normally index the name and the death date, but there's lots of other information, for example, cause of death in here that we can index in an automated way to provide more information for these stories. Just as kind of a side note, we had one project during COVID days. It turns out that the Spanish flu from 1918 was very similar to COVID. It caused respiratory problems, and you could actually look at death records from 1918, and if they had pneumonia, for example, this one says right lobar pneumonia. If you could find that, you knew they were probably dying of the Spanish flu. And different communities had tried different strategies, just like we tried during COVID. Some of them wore masks. Others tried different vaccination techniques. Others tried different kinds of isolation and shutting down their cities. And so our intention was to say, well, let's try to create. We're going to read all of these death records. Here's all the counties in Texas, and we're going to look at the count of people that died of pneumonia or other respiratory difficulties, and look at what that percentage was for their population, and then figure out, well, which one of them tried masks, and let's see if we could actually apply that to our strategies during COVID. So that's an example of how you can use this other information on death certificates if you can easily transcribe automatically all of the information in record. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction to deep learning. Again, I'm a computer science professor. So a lot of the classes I teach are how do you write a program, for example, to convert between inches and centimeters. And you can imagine, well, I'm going to write a program, I know the rules, and I'm going to encode that into a program. When we talk about deep learning, instead of actually writing a program that tells the computer actually what to do, what we're going to do is write a program that simulates the neural network inside of your brain. And instead of telling it how to convert between centimeters and inches, what we will do is give it a bunch of examples, and we'll let the neural network learn on its own. So the question is, we now have these large language models like ChatGPT that have incorporated like everything in Wikipedia and in newspapers and anything they can find on Facebook and Instagram. And so could we actually use that to help write stories that could be therapeutic, for example? And so the first step was to take a look at this. Could we, if we don't have them create stories, could we at least allow them to weave information together to create a more inspirational story? And so that was kind of our intent, taking a look at that. And a lot of this early work was done with ChatGPT 3.5. And then I'm going to just show you a little bit of the difference between 3.5 and 4.0. Again, each of these is created by looking through huge collections of text of everything that they can possibly find. And again, we're not going to write a program that knows how to talk to you or knows how to answer questions. We're going to write a program that simulates your brain, and then we're going to give it lots of examples so that it can learn on its own, which is a very different strategy for computer programming. So in essence, these large language systems allow us to predict a sequence of text from an input string. And they've been trained, ChatGPT 3.5 was trained on 300 billion tokens from all kinds of different texts. It had 175 billion parameters. In essence, you can think of that as being what neurons have learned. And it can then try to allow you to talk to it in a natural way and uses natural language to access information. So we said, let's see what ChatGPT can do to help us create these family history stories. So we talked earlier about this John Oscathorpe. So you can ask it, can you tell me about John Oscathorpe, born in Sheffield, Yorkshire, England? And so here's its response. First of all, take a look at this. It sounds really good. He's a Mormon pioneer, a missionary who's instrumental in the early growth of the church. The leader in the church, served as a member of the First Council of 70, missionary in England, Wales, and Denmark. And I guess listening to this, you could potentially say, I feel a connection to this person. He got his birth date right. He was instrumental in the church. He was buried in Salt Lake City Cemetery. But all this other stuff, we would say is a hallucination because it apparently learned some things that were not correct. So I've got about 38% right in this particular case. Here's another case. We can ask him to tell you about this. Again, if you ask it several questions, the same question several times, it will give you different things every time because it's, again, going to just try to retrieve what's in the neural network. So in this particular case, got one right, about 18%. The rest was a hallucination. Here's another example. Again, about 14%. So I think on average, we're going to say, I'm not sure that this is very good. As you include more information, in this case, we can say he was married to Lydia Roper. You can take a look at the response. It's got a higher accuracy. So the more information you can give it, the better it's going to be. Again, here, as we add the death date where he died, you can start seeing better results. And around here, all of a sudden, you get an auto-generated story that is very similar to what we did in 1997 for the sesquicentennial. So it's going to have most of the facts. It's going to be able to weave them together in something similar to what Family Search has in their About tabs. So in this particular case, you can see it's going to provide lots of information. And as you would read this, possibly you would start to be able to feel like I'm connected to this person, and it could actually provide a therapeutic experience for somebody who's feeling lonely, as we started talking about before. So if we go take a look at this, this example here, even though it was not perfect, I'm not sure if it really matters that it was off by a few years between when he moved to Salt Lake or when he was baptized into the church. He was a member in the East Mill Creek Stake, held positions, never was a bishop. But if I take a look at some of these hallucinations, you could start asking yourself, if we give it enough information, it's going to generate an interesting enough story that maybe it's worth investigating this for creating family history stories. I actually had a long, agitated discussion with a historian. And one of the things I was asking is, if you take two historians that look at the same information, they're going to come to very different conclusions about what happened. I know my great-grandmother, he could tell stories, and my father said, you know, I was actually in that place when that happened, and I just don't remember it being nearly that interesting. So again, is ChatGPT worse than an arbitrary person with somewhat poor memory like me? And it's kind of hard to know. But it's getting a lot of information here that could be part of creating stories. Again, it's fluid and convincing. It has human-like narratives. It had some impressive nuances, like it knew what a bishop was. It was able to tell something about Latter-day Saint history. And there's varied outputs, even with the same input query. And the question is, it had no idea about family history or about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. What could it do if we actually trained it on family history stories and data? It could probably do even better. So we said 50% correct, but maybe we're going to be getting up an 80 and 90% correct in generating stories on its own. Now, I'm just going to tell you this. I have found that I love sharing my testimony with my children and grandchildren. And if I try to tell them a story, they're going to be bored to tears. I'll just cut to the chase. However, if I tell ChatGPT to create a inspirational story using these facts, it does a really good job, a lot better than I could do with hours of work. And I can edit out the hallucinations and I can send that to my children. They're much more interested in it than if I gave them my boring effect. So I think that this is a ripe area for creating family history stories, particularly as we use feedback from users to improve the accuracy. Again, it's going to learn about this. One interesting thing is we have examples like this iloveconference.org, which was actually created by Dallin Quass. But let me just give you an example. So here we trained it on general conference talks from 1980 to 2023. And you can now ask it a question like, boy, I should have thought of a good question, but who was Mosiah? And it's then going to say, well, he was a righteous king in the Book of Mormon who passed on leadership to his son and successors. In this particular case, it's also going to give you a bunch of conference talks that talked about Mosiah. And so you can ask, how old should a child be when they are baptized? And so again, at 8 years of age. So here's some information that it just learned and was able to answer this question based on learning from general conference talks. So from my perspective, if we actually started training on family history stories, there's a chance that we could actually get some much higher accuracy. So that's kind of the direction we're trying to take, is let's first of all see if we can figure out what is therapeutic in a family history story, then train one of these large language models so that it can actually create good inspirational family history stories that will be therapeutic. Here's another little information. I'm now going to give a little bit of a pitch. If you have not ever gone there, the Family History Technology Laboratory at BYU, we have a large number of applications, again, that are really trying to connect the human family through technology. And among these are games and tools for doing family history, something that will help you find baby names for your next child by looking through your ancestors. And one of the things that we have here is Relative Finder. We have about 1.3 million users. And so the nice thing about Relative Finder is that when you log in, it's going to then show you how you're related to famous people, people that came over on the Mayflower, and mostly a lot of wards will use it to show how they're related with other people in their ward. And if you've never done this, this is just a lot of fun. And you can actually specify which groups you're interested in, and it will tell you more information about them. So we contacted our users and asked them how they would respond to a statement. Using Relative Finder helps me feel more connected to my community. And so now we are going to be able to categorize that into some people in an earlier question said, I don't use Relative Finder very much. Others said they use it medium, and others say they use it a lot. And so I don't know if you can tell, but here we're saying, how connected do you feel to your community? And it appears that those who are using this application more are feeling more like they're connected to their community. And particularly those that the high use people feel more connected than those that are low use. So this was kind of, again, answering our first question, this hypothesis that family history helps me feel more connected, which I'm going to say is a proxy for not as lonely, appears to be connected with using this Relative Finder thing. Again, we kind of went off on this direction because we had emails for a large number of users, so we could actually perform this experiment. Another question here said, using Relative Finder had a positive impact on my emotional well-being. So again, we're trying to talk here about, is there a mental health impact to doing family history? And again, people that use it a lot seem to say, yes, it does have a positive impact on my emotional well-being. Or those who don't use it very much, it's more likely to be neutral or not helpful at all. So again, this is kind of a piece that we kind of like to take a look at. The flow here would be a user authenticates to family search. We find a story that our machine learning network thinks will be inspirational. Probably the thing we found most successful is you grab a story out from one of their ancestors in their memories. It's 10 pages long, and it's just really boring. So then we say, ChatGPT, please summarize this story in an inspirational tone. It comes back and we give that to the user, and hopefully that person feels encouraged. There's pieces here we're still working on. We have a machine learning algorithm that we're trying to train on which stories are inspirational and which aren't. And this, again, is that piece we're working on with the psychology department, where they're going to have people inside of an MRI machine, and we're going to have them read different stories. And then we need enough of them that we can train our machine learning algorithm. So this is still a work in progress, but the basic idea of finding a story for you and giving it back to you is working now. So here's some questions that we need to answer still. How true to the original should the summarized story be to be therapeutic? And again, this is kind of a strange research area, but what I'm really trying to get at is what helps the spirit of Elijah to actually touch your heart. So as we look back there and we saw a story that might be 50% correct, will the Spirit testify that that's, and you should know that you're a child of God with that? or how true does it need to be? Obviously, as we mentioned before, two people that have been in the same place could tell different stories. One of them would say the other person's only 50% correct. And so, how accurate do we need to be from a family history technology perspective to be therapeutic? So we're going to be doing some big studies on this in the near future. Another question is, how closely related should the relative be for the story to be therapeutic? I mean, if you've ever used Relative Finder, you will find that you are related to almost everybody in your ward, but some of them, it may be a third cousin twice removed. And is that so? If I find a story from somebody who is distantly related, will that be as therapeutic as if it's somebody like my grandfather? Also, what other family history activities could be therapeutic? We'd like to experiment. Well, we want you to go and add a source to one of your ancestors. Go and correct the date format. Is that therapeutic? How about doing indexing? Is that therapeutic? How about just investigating your tree and seeing how you're connected to other people? How many children do different families have? That's another thing that we could potentially look at. And the other piece we're trying to think about is, how do we get users to access these family history stories regularly? Because our suspicion is that just going and reading a story once is not going to improve your mental health as much as if you come back every day for a month. And so how do we get them to access that application more regularly? And so it needs to be engaging. Again, going back here, there's all this information that we have in terms of places they've lived, service they've done, letters and journals, death certificates. As we start putting these together, all of a sudden we can create a real connection to our ancestor. And that's really the piece that we would like to look at. And so I wanted to just do some, for those of you who haven't used Chat GPT a lot before, I thought it would be interesting to kind of see what the results are. Right here, I'm using Chat GPT 4.0. And so I just gave it the prompt, tell me about Mark Clement from BYU. And so you notice from here, we have a lot of information. Every single bit of this is absolutely true. So it has been trained on enough information to know that I was a founder of a startup company and all kinds of other stuff that I do. I could also say, instead of just tell me about him, I could actually say, well, tell me an inspirational story about me. By the way, I have no idea what this is going to say. I've never tried it, but let's see what happens. And so here we go. And so you'll notice that it's going to start talking about my commitment to service and teaching and mentoring students. All of a sudden, this becomes a lot more interesting. Some of this, however, are hallucinations. Again, I work with the record linking lab, but I haven't really developed that research. Most of that's been done by Joe Price, but it's kind of learning some of that. And so you can kind of get a feel for how this could work. And so, I could then say, tell me a a story about Mark Clement with an inspirational tone. And we can kind of start to see that it's going to start telling me more of a story. Boy, this is really interesting. And I think probably part of this uh, could have come from maybe this vision process. But again, notice that this it is a tool that we can use to create stories that are engaging. And here's a person here, Clarence Moraine Clement, and someplace in here is a story about him. And so I could take this story that, first of all, is so long that I'm not sure how I could get anybody to read it. But I could take some part of this. By the way, I don't remember what the limit is. There is a limit on the length of these questions I can ask. And I could say something like, summarize the following story in an inspirational tone. But here is going to come back and tell me, again, this is a lot more interesting to read. It's going to grab pieces out of the story, but make it in an inspirational tone. And I can now say, condense this story to 1 paragraph, which, probably for a lot of people, that might be all they can handle. And I think that, maybe reading this, I might be able to see that my ancestors were able to overcome hardships, and maybe I can too. Maybe I can show resilience. But that's kind of, in summary, where we're going. We would like to create family history stories that can help people to feel less anxious and to have better mental health. So thank you.